gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Doug Speed. And Doug is a research fellow at University College London who works on developing statistical methods to improve our understanding of complex diseases. But you're not going to talk about complex diseases today.
Not too much.
No, we're going to talk instead about who's your president using DNA to determine relatedness. So let's give a big welcome to Doug Speed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maurice, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a bit nervous. I've never given a talk in a room where it's so easy to lead, but hopefully you will hang around for a bit. So I'm going to mainly be talking about this paper we wrote. It came out in 2015, so just under a year ago. The title is Relatedness in the Post-Genomic Era, Is It Still Useful? So it's by myself, actually, and David Baldwin, who is my supervisor at the time, now a collaborator. This was published in a journal called Nature Reviews Genetics. If you have a look online, you may be able to find it, or if not, if you're interested, I've put a copy of this paper on my website, and I will put this link up at the end of the slides. So to give you a bit of background into what we were trying to look at. So I'm originally a mathematician, and something is worth knowing. Us mathematicians, we're a pedantic type. This is our examples of humour. And so one thing is we don't take anything at face value. And so, for example, the word relatedness is very commonly used. Everyone talks about being related to other people. But our question is, well, what does this actually mean? What is the statistical background when people talk about being related? And so that's what we set out to examine. And this is what the title, the first line says. As I say, relatedness is a fundamental concept in genetics that is surprisingly hard to define in a rigorous yet useful way. And so that's what we tried to examine. And so, to give an example, all the time people ask me if I'm related to George Clooney. I should say there's a lot of professional talks in this workshop, but this might not be the most. But if people were to say this, what does that actually mean to be related to someone? And so you're all probably familiar with these kind of expressions. You'll say you're 50% related to your brother, you're 50% related to your father, you're 25% related to each of your grandparents, and so on. And what do these values actually mean when people use them? What they actually correspond to is the average amount of DNA sharing. So how much of your DNA, your genetic makeup, you're expected to share between two people. So I'm expected to share 50% of my DNA will be shared with my brother, 25% with my grandparents. And so something you've probably seen before is the family tree. And so this outlines how individuals are related to each other. And so to put a bit of reference, here's me on my family tree. And so I am 50% related to my brother. So that means I share on average 50% of my genetic material. I'm 50% related to my father, and again that means we share 50% of our material on average. I'm 25% related to my nephew. And so you can keep going, there's all these different coefficients. So here's a table which shows for the different types of relatedness, the average coefficient of relatedness is coefficient R. So I've added a few numbers, S and T. You don't have to worry about those for a moment. I'll explain what they mean later. The main thing is this coefficient R. So for example, here we have 4 siblings. So me and my brother, we're 50%, half related. If I had an identical twin, I'd be 100% related to them. If I had a half sibling, it would be a quarter, and so on, all the way down. We go as far as cousins. I am 1/8 related to my cousins. And so as I say, the question is, what does this mean? So here's a picture, here's a guide to how DNA is shared. So here's an example, here's a father. And so every individual has their DNA, but they have 2 copies, and I think Morris touched on this in the previous talk, we heard that. 2 sets of DNA in chromosomes. So here's an individual. If he had a set of green DNA, all the DNA which this individual inherited from his father. And similarly, this purple, this represents all the DNA this individual inherited from his mother. And so what happens when a man and woman love each other and they decide to have a child? They produce offspring, and the son, in this example, their DNA is a combination of both of their parents. So if we consider this is me, I have two sets of DNA. Half of my DNA comes from my father, and it's a mix of their DNA. And so green represents which DNA my father inherited from his father, and I will inherit some of that at some point of my DNA. At other points I inherit the DNA which my father inherited from his mother. And so you end up with this mosaic, where the DNA I inherit from my father is a mixture of the DNA he inherited from his father and the DNA he inherited from his mother. And of course I also inherit material from my mother. And so on this example, I've represented in red the DNA which my mother has inherited from her father. This is going to get very confusing, but hopefully I'll make sense of it. And likewise, the blue is the DNA which my mother inherited from her mother. And again, I have inherited DNA, and it's a mixture. And so just like my paternal, my DNA from my father is a mixture of my dad's DNA, the DNA I inherit from my mother is a mixture of these red and blue parts, where I've inherited my mum's paternal DNA or my mum's maternal DNA. And so if I was to have a sister, that would go through this same process of recombination. So here is a daughter, and again, she has this DNA which is either green or purple, and that's the DNA she's inherited from her father, and the DNA which is red and blue, DNA inherited from her mother, and it's all this mosaic. And so, what we're often interested in when we talk about individuals being related, as in having a shared ancestor, is how much of their DNA they have in common. So in this example, how much DNA do I share with my sister? So I'm the son here. I've inherited at the top some green information, which my sister has also inherited. So for these parts here, we share the same DNA from our father. And if we move down in this very simple example, for blue, for example here, we both inherited the same DNA from our mother. On the other hand, there'd be regions of our DNA which we haven't inherited together. So, for example, at the top, I've inherited the start of my DNA from my mother's paternal DNA, whereas my sister's inherited from mother's maternal DNA, and so it mismatches. And so when we talk about individuals being related, what we are asking is how much of their DNA they've inherited from shared ancestors. And so to go back to this family tree, here's me, and as I say, the relationship between me and my father is 50%. Let's add some people to this. So let's suppose my dad was George Clooney. So why might we be interested? There's lots of reasons we might want to know who we're related to. One is we might want to know whether we're likely to share the same characteristics, the same traits. So what do we know about George Clooney? He's a great actor. I'm not sure whether there's a genetic basis for that, so it's unlikely I've inherited that. But if we watch the advert, we know George Clooney likes coffee. And it turns out there is a genetic variant which will influence whether you drink coffee or not. It's not strictly that direct, but there are variants, and if an individual has particular genetic variants, it will affect how tolerant they are to caffeine, and therefore it will have a small effect on whether they tend to drink coffee or not. So one reason I might be interested in knowing whether George Clooney was my father is how likely are we to share the same love of coffee? As you can see, it's a bit of a ridiculous example, but hopefully we'll get the point across. And so somewhere on the DNA, I think it's quite confident to say there is a genetic variant which George Clooney has which makes him enjoy coffee. And so the question is, how likely is it if I'm his son, I've inherited this variant? And there, that depends on where George Clooney got this variant from. If he inherited this coffee gene, if we call it, so if his love of coffee came from his father, so it's on this green DNA, where in this example I also would have inherited it, because at this particular point my DNA came from Georgie's father's DNA. On the other hand, if he inherited his love of coffee from his mother, well, for this part of DNA, I didn't inherit his mother's DNA, and so I wouldn't enjoy coffee as much as he does. And so we can extend this family tree. I put in my mother, Serena Williams, and so the same way, she's quite good at tennis, and so it's possible there's a tennis gene, and so I'm 50% related to Serena Williams. And so with a 50-50 chance, I would have inherited this attitude for tennis. So if she had inherited that from her mother on this red, from her father on this red DNA, well, I wouldn't have inherited it because at this location I've missed it. Whereas if she had inherited her love of tennis from her mother on this blue DNA, well, I've inherited that part of DNA from Serena Williams, and so I'd also have this skill of tennis. And just as this isn't get absurd enough, I'm going to introduce a sister, Lisa Simpson. The same logic applies. I'm 50% related to Lisa Simpson, and she loves music, as we all know. And so again, it's 50-50 whether I would inherit the same love of music as Lisa Simpson. So that's one way we can interpret these coefficients of relatedness. So in this example, if she had inherited that from the blue DNA from her mother, then I would have shared that same trait. Okay, so that's a bit silly, but we're going to go back to the more mathematical description of this coefficient of relatedness. And so that's what this means, this value R. It's how much DNA pairs of individuals share, and it also gives us an indication of how different characteristics they might inherit. So I also have these values S and T. So these are a bit complicated, but this value S is the number of links between a pair of individuals. So I'll explain on the next slide in the example. And this value T is the number of common ancestors. So for example, going back to this four siblings, me and Lisa Simpson, we have values S equals 2, T equals 2. There's 2 links between us and we have 2 shared ancestors. So in this example, there's 2 links because to get from me to Lisa Simpson, we go up to our parents, 1, and then we come down 1. So there's 2 links between us, and we have 2 common ancestors, George and Serena. And so this is just a very general equation we can use here to calculate this expected relatedness. It's half to the power of S, the number of links between us, times T. So that's useful if you want to have more distant relatives. So if, for example, you're connecting someone through 10 links, so a great-great-great-grandfather in common, you can do this half to the power of S, and that will tell you how much DNA you're expected to share from them. Just another bit more technical aspect, as well as this coefficient of relatedness, we like to talk about something called coefficient of kinship, and that's just half the coefficient of relatedness. So I've used this simple phi, the coefficient of kinship. So here are our relationships between different pairs of individuals, and the coefficient of kinship is half of that. Just to explain where this comes from, as I say, us mathematicians are pedantic. So R, this coefficient of relatedness, is the probability of me and Lisa, for example, sharing DNA from a common ancestor. What this coefficient of kinship is, it's the probability of us sharing common DNA on the same strand. And so, our love of music, if we shared music, there's a 50% chance we would share the gene in total, but if we were to actually examine the individual strands of DNA and say, what's the chance it was here and here, it's 50%. But as I say, this is just a small technicality which us mathematicians love to try and be very precise. And so it seems relatively straightforward. If you know your family tree, you can then calculate the expected relationships between all the individuals. So here I've expanded my family tree a bit further into a few more generations. And so in theory, I can look at different pairs, and I can look at the family tree and see how they're connected. So here's David Cameron, and we've got links back to Winston Churchill, the Queen, and we can count how many links up, count how many links down, multiplied by the number of the common ancestors, and this will then tell us how much DNA I'm expected to share with David Cameron, for example. And that seems quite straightforward, perhaps, but there are problems. And of course, one problem is there's only a limited amount of pedigree information. We only know our family tree to a few generations. Maybe we know 5 generations back, maybe we know 10 generations back. But there's always going to be a limit to our knowledge. And so, for example, here I've added in Boris Johnson. And so one question might be, how related am I to Boris Johnson? Based on this family tree, where we know Boris Johnson is the offspring of Mrs. Potato Head and Mr. Bean, in this example. But based on this family tree, there's no links between me and Boris Johnson. So I would conclude we're 0% related. We have a coefficient of relatedness 0. But I was looking on Wikipedia a few days ago and I found out that Boris Johnson is related to David Cameron through just a few links. And so once I found that out, I've had to add in a few more links to my tree, go off, and I'll have to start all over again. I've just found some new information, a new link in my tree, so then I have to go back to the beginning and recalculate all of these pairs. So here's David, here's me, I've now found I've got an additional ancestor and so on. And so that's a problem with having to base your information on this family information pedigree tree. And there's actually a more serious problem from a statistical point of view. All of these values I've been explaining so far are expected amounts of DNA sharing. So I'm expected to share 50% of my DNA with my sister. In truth, it's quite different. What this graph shows, on the x-axis, sorry it's a bit small, but this shows the actual amount of DNA two full siblings, so 2 brothers and sisters share. And we know it's expected to be 50%, and down the middle here, this is 50%. But what you can see for different pairs of individuals, there's quite a bit of difference in how much. And sorry it's a bit small. If it goes down here, it's 40%, so you can have a brother and sister who share only 40% of their DNA. And at this end, you can have a brother and sister who share 60% of their DNA. And I'll explain why that happens in a bit. But what this means is, the coefficient of relatedness is 50% for all brothers and sisters. But actually some would be much more closely genetically related than others. And so that then has a knock-on when we want to consider the impacts of DNA sharing. So I was talking about what traits I might share with my sister Lisa Simpson. Here's all these different traits and hobbies she possesses. If I happen to be one of these pairs of individuals who are only poorly related, so we're expected to share 50% of our DNA, but in truth maybe we only share 40%, then there's going to be less similarity between our characteristics. Conversely, we might have a pair of individuals who might be very closely related and might share 60% of our DNA, and in that sense we're more likely to share more characteristics. And so why does this happen? So this is now a bit more detailed look at an individual's DNA. And so before I just had one pair of lines, actually each individual has 23 pairs of chromosomes. And if I could have fitted on, there'd be 22 pairs of these lines. There's also the sex chromosomes, which are excluded. So this is chromosome 1. So this individual, chromosome 1, has a copy from his father in green, a copy from his mother in purple. And likewise chromosome 2, and 3, and 4. And actually the way these are ordered is in terms of length. So chromosomes 1 and 2 are the longest chromosomes, and I'll explain a bit later what that means. And so each of these chromosomes represents a length of DNA. So you might be familiar with the idea of DNA, but essentially it's a very long string. And so these are just very simple diagrams where I put it as green and purple bars. But actually This green bar is a long length of DNA. Each of these are base pairs or nucleotides, if you like, and so some of you might be familiar with the idea that actually, if you looked in very close detail, you'd see these are all a string of letters. Each base pair is either an A, a C, a G, or a T, and so each individual is made up of just a very long string of these different letters. Chromosome 1 is very long, it contains about 3 million base pairs, and so this will have 3 million base pairs. Each of these base pairs is either an A, C, G, or T. Chromosome 22 is a bit shorter, it contains about 50 million base pairs. And so when we inherit DNA from our parents, so going back to the example here, it's my father's DNA, and this is my DNA which I've inherited. The part of the DNA I inherit from my father's chromosome 1 is independent of the DNA I inherit from his chromosome 2. So to explain what this means in terms of colours, down here at the bottom left, this is the genetic material I've inherited from my dad's chromosome 1, and as I say, it would be either mainly, it could be from his maternal or his paternal DNA. And then also I've inherited chromosome 2, and again, maybe it's come from his paternal DNA, maybe paternal, so the different colours indicate whether it's maternal or paternal. Now, if this hasn't confused you enough, there's added complications in that when I inherit genetic material from these chromosomes, I don't inherit whole chromosomes. And so, for example, here, when I'm inheriting chromosome 1 from my father, it's not necessarily all of his green DNA, or it's not necessarily all of his purple DNA, it's going to be a mixture. It quite possibly will be a mixture of some of his father's DNA and some of his mother's DNA. And the same for each of these chromosomes. It is possible that I've inherited a whole chromosome intact. And so, for example, in this here, chromosome 9 is all purple, so I've inherited all of my dad's maternal DNA. That's possible, but in other chromosomes, I inherit a combination, a mosaic. Every time you see one of these changes in colour, this is something called a recombination event. And this is where your DNA has flipped over during reproduction. I put a slide here, a figure which I won't go into too much detail, but it'll be available to have a look on the YouTube page. But essentially, this is showing how during reproduction, you have your chromosomes, and they get merged together. So there's new chromosomes are created in a combination of maternal and paternal DNA. And so this is what we set out to look at in this paper. We tried to simulate what happens during reproduction when DNA is passed from ancestors to descendants. And to do that, we had to look at the thing called recombination. So this recombination, so when your DNA flips over between being your mother's or your father's DNA, is a very rare event. So if we were to take any of these base pairs, the chance is 10 to the minus 8. So what that means is 1 in 100 million chance. So as in, if I've inherited base pair number 1, so the start of my DNA from my dad, there's a 1 in 100 million chance that the next base pair would be inherited from my mother, i.e. it's flipped, there's been recombination. It's far more likely if I've inherited some DNA from my dad, the next part of DNA will also come from my dad's dad. But even though the chance for each of these individual base pairs is very, very slim, in our DNA we have 3 billion base pairs, so there's very many chances of this happening. And so, on average, this will happen reasonably frequently. So, between my dad's DNA being passed down to me, on average there'll be about 30 of these recombination events, so 30 instances where the inheritance is flipped. So this is the most mathematical slide, just to give a few numbers. So I told you how chromosome 1 is the longest part, the longest section of your DNA. It contains about 300 million base pairs. And so each of these base pairs, there's a chance of this recombination event happening. And because it's so long, that means there's a relatively high chance. I put the maths here if you didn't want to work out how it was, but essentially, chromosome 1, your longest length of DNA, there's only a 5% chance you inherit all of chromosome 1 from your father's paternal DNA, or all of it from the mother's DNA. Which means there's a 95% chance of one of these recombination events happening. Whereas chromosome 22, they're ordered in terms of length, is the shortest. It's only 50 megabase pairs long, so it's got 15 million individual base pairs. And that means there's now a 40% chance one of these recombination events happens. And so in this paper we set out to do simulations to examine this. And this picture shows how we went about this. So let's suppose this is one length of DNA, this is chromosome 1. So it has base pair number 1, number 2, number 3, all the way down to base pair 300 million at the bottom. And we wanted to try and recreate the process of reproduction of how DNA is passed down from the father to son. And so what we started, we did a simulation, and you can picture it by imagining you're tossing a coin. Now normally a coin you toss is 50% chance of coming up heads, 50% chance of coming up tails. But for this you have to imagine you're tossing a coin which is very loaded, very biased. Every time you toss it, the chance of it being heads is 1 in 100 million. And that is the chance of one of these fits, these recombinations. And so in this example, a recombination is when it goes from green to purple, or purple to green. And so we did a simulation where we generated these base pairs, and at base pair number 1, we tossed the coin. If it landed heads, which has chance 1 in 100 million, then we would change the colour. So it would go from green to purple, or purple to green. And that signifies a recombination, one of these occasions where DNA is splitting between individuals. But more likely it would come up tails, in which case it's the same colour. So we did this in base pair number 1, we tossed the coin, it was green, then it came up tails, and there was no change, base pair number 2, number 3, and it's very unlikely to change. But at some point it will happen because we're tossing this coin so many times. And that was how we did these simulations. This is our example for chromosome 1. So this has 300 million of these base pairs. So we tossed the coin 300 million times. There's 22 non-sex chromosome pairs, and so we did this 22 times for each individual. And then we repeat this all about 1 million times. So that we can examine over this whole range of different simulations how likely are these things going to happen. I should just say that actually this paper wasn't the first to examine this. So sorry this is a bit small, but there's a paper from 1981 by a chap called Kevin Donnelly, and he set out to do the same thing. So this is 35 years ago. So he wanted to investigate this process of recombination in individuals. But this is long before the days of high processing, high powerful computers. And so he had to do all of this using just mathematics. And this paper is 30 pages of equations, and I have no idea what this means. If anyone does, please tell me. It's a brutal paper, but 35 years ago, he had to go through all these different equations, do differential modelling, all these kind of words I don't understand, to come up with these answers. What we did last year took us about an hour, just by throwing it at the computer and just letting it run. Went and had a cup of tea, came back, all these simulations were done, and we really felt sorry for the fact that this Kevin had spent 3-4 years going through this very detailed mathematics. And actually, our approach was a bit better than his, I'm embarrassed to say, because the chance of recombination is not constant. So in parts of your DNA, it's more likely one of these DNA flips will happen. When you do these simulations on a computer, you can model this. You can have different parts of the DNA are more likely, some are less likely. When Kevin did this 35 years ago, he had to make this assumption it was all constant throughout the DNA. So actually ours was a bit of an improvement. as I say, quite embarrassing how much easier it was for us. And so what are the results of the simulations? We looked at a lot of things. This table's in the paper. And I'm going to focus on this first column. And I've got a bigger version on the next slide. So down here we have different types of relationships. So siblings, half-siblings, first cousins, half-cousins, and so on. So as you go down, this pair of individuals come in more and more distantly related. And these are how many generations between them. Siblings are 1 generation apart. First cousins are 2 generations apart. And A is how many ancestors they have in common. This is the coefficient of kinship. So this is how much DNA they are expected to share. So remember, this is half their relationship. So for full siblings, they have coefficient of relatedness 50%, so coefficient of kinship 25%. What this problem shows is the confidence interval. And I don't expect you to be familiar with the idea. But what this shows is how much variation there is around the expected values. So hopefully this becomes clearer on this picture. So 2 full siblings are expected to have a relationship 50%. They're expected to share 50% of their DNA, which means they're expected to share 25% coefficient of kinship. In truth, it can be quite different. So it can be as low as, instead of on average 0.25, it can be as low as 0.2 or as high as 0.3. And then we move along to half siblings. So brothers and sisters with 1 parent in common. And so they're expected to share 25% of their DNA. This expected coefficient of kinship 1/8. But again, there's quite a bit of variety. And one of the important messages from this is, suppose for 2 individuals we were able to work out exactly how much DNA 2 individuals had in common, how well could we then tell how closely related they were? So let's suppose you presented me with 2 individuals and you told me they were 45% related. They had coefficient of kinship 0.22. That would be over here. It would be quite obvious they must be full siblings to have 40% relatedness. And so that would be an easy situation. But on the other hand, suppose you had a pair of individuals and they were 5% related. So you looked at their DNA and you determined they would share 5% of it. There's all these different relationships which it's consistent with. So it might be that they're first cousins. It might be that half first cousins who just happen to be highly related half first cousins. It might be that they're half siblings who just happen to be lowly genetically similar, lowly related half siblings. So the point is, if we know how much DNA 2 individuals share, except for these extreme cases where they're full siblings, it's very hard actually to know how closely related they are. And so, especially when you're talking about distant relatives, so maybe 5, 6, 7 generations apart, how much DNA they share is very small, and it's very hard to tell actually how closely they're related from that information alone. So another thing we looked at in this paper, by doing all these simulations, we were able to calculate how likely the probability that pairs of individuals actually share any DNA. And that's what this column shows. And so this number is the probability between 0 and 1. This is the chance that these 2 individuals share DNA. And so if you have siblings, their chance is essentially 100%, probability of 1. If you have a brother and sister, it's pretty much guaranteed they will share DNA. It's possible they won't, but it's very, very unlikely. And similarly for half siblings, they will share DNA which they've inherited either both from their father or both from their mother. And so on, as we move down, first cousins, it's still 100% likely that first cousins will share DNA. But we were quite surprised to find out that you don't have to go down too far until there is a realistic chance that this pair of individuals are not sharing DNA. So here we have an example of half-second cousins. So what that means is you can think of half-second cousins are 2 individuals who have a great-grandfather in common. So as in you have to go up 3 links to get from the individual to great-grandfather, then come down 3 links. what this is telling you is there is a 0.995 chance that they share DNA. So that's very high. It also means there's a 0.5% chance that two individuals who are half-third cousins actually share no DNA with each other. And then as you go down further, it jumps. So here we have third cousins. There's a 97% chance third cousins share DNA, but that means there's a 3% chance they don't. And if you go down to individuals who are separated by 10 generations, we get to a point where there's only a 0.1% chance that they actually share DNA. So a 10.1% chance that they share DNA with each other once you're separated by 10 generations. And so to give an example, here's another famous family tree. This is our royal family. And so at the top we have Queen and Prince Philip. If we go down one generation to Charles and Anne, 2 generations we get William, Harry. If we go down 3 generations to the bottom, here we have great-grandchildren. So I love the names today. There's George and Charlotte and Savannah, Ida, Mia. I've got them wrong, that is too small for you to answer correctly. But the point of these simulations, what they showed is, if we were to consider Prince George and Princess Savannah, so the daughter of William and Kate, and the son of William and Kate, and the daughter who is Zara Phillips and Mike Tingle, if we consider these two individuals who have the common ancestor of the Queen and Prince Philip 3 generations back, there is a realistic chance that even though we know they're related, I'm not making any scandalous suggestions, we know they're related, but actually from a DNA point of view, there is a realistic chance they share no DNA. So George and Savannah have inherited no DNA, both from the Queen's mother's side, or both from the Queen's father's side, or both from Prince Philip's mother, or both from Prince Philip's father. So even though we know they're related, there is a chance, and if you look in, there's actually 6 different combinations. You can compare George with Savannah, George with Ida, George with Maya, Charlotte. So there's 6 different combinations. It's actually more likely, it's reasonably likely that one of these pairs don't actually share any DNA descended directly, even though we know they're related. And that's what this plot shows here. So on the x-axis, this is the number of generations separating a pair of individuals. So over here, individuals who are separated by 1 generation, as in 4 siblings, individuals 2 generations, first cousins, and so on. On the right hand side, these are very distantly related individuals. We're going to focus on these 2 solid lines, this black line and this red line. What the black line shows is how many ancestors these 2 individuals will have. So, given that if a pair of individuals are separated by 1 generation, they're full siblings, and so they have 2 ancestors, 2 common ancestors, their mother and their father. If they're separated by 2 generations, they have 4 common ancestors. If it's 3 generations, it's 8. So you can appreciate it doubles every time. So within 10 generations, we have over 1,000 ancestors 10 generations back. And within about 20 generations, you're essentially going to be related to everyone else in the United Kingdom. So we will be related to everyone else in the UK within 10, 15 generations. That's the black line. What this red line shows is how many of those you actually share DNA with. So even though after 10 generations, we're related to pretty much everyone else, so we have a common ancestor within 10 generations with everyone else in the UK, the chance of us sharing any DNA with them is relatively slim. So obviously we're both 100% likely to share DNA with our parents, and we're more likely, very, very likely to share with our grandparents if we're first cousins. But once we're separated by 10 generations, we're related, and we probably don't actually share DNA. As this gradually increases, and it's quite a bit less. So there's all these individuals we are related to by pedigree, they're our ancestors, but we actually share no DNA with them. And this plot shows it in a slightly different way. This is relative chance of being sharing DNA with someone who you share ancestry with. So again, on the x-axis, this is the number of generations separating. So at the far left, we'll have one generation. So we're now looking at me and my sister. We have two ancestors, and it's 100% chance, a probability of 1, that we share DNA due to these two ancestors. But as we move along, the chance that we share DNA drops down quite suddenly. So after 10 generations, we're being related to ancestry, but there's already been maybe a 20% chance that we share DNA because of that. What's interesting is that it then picks up. So there's a limit to how many individuals you can be your ancestors, because there's a limit to how many people are in the world. Once you get to 7 billion, you can't have any more related ancestries. But the number of individuals you share DNA gradually increases as you go further, many more and more generations back in the family tree. So the final thing we considered in this paper was the length of these shared fragments. So to try and explain what I mean here, this is the picture I showed earlier of the DNA which I've inherited from my parents, which my sister has inherited, and it was all coloured according to whether it was our father's maternal DNA or paternal DNA, or our mother's maternal DNA or mother's maternal DNA. And what we're interested in are regions of the DNA which we inherited the same DNA from. And on this graph, this is points where we have the same colour. So for example, here, we've inherited green DNA, so this comes from our father's maternal DNA, as has our daughter, and we have a region of shared ancestry, shared DNA, sorry. Whereas there'll be some regions of the genome where we don't share. Directly share DNA. And so what we're now interested in are the lengths of these different regions, so how long these overlap. And that's what this plot shows. So the top is one generation, so individuals who are separated by one generation, so brothers and sisters. This is the average length of the DNA that they share, the average length of the fragments. So MB, this stands for million base pairs. So between me and my sister, there's all these, I can share very long stretches of DNA. I could share DNA which is 50 million base pairs long, so relatively speaking, very long. So this is for one generation, this red dot. At the bottom, this green, is individuals who are separated by 10 generations. And we've already discussed that individuals who are separated by 10 generations, it's very unlikely they do share DNA. But actually, what's interesting is if they do share DNA, the lengths of the DNA they share are reasonably long. So here we have pairs of individuals who have regions which are 30 megabase pairs long. So they have regions of genome which are 30 million base pairs long, which they've inherited from the same ancestor. And so even though the chance that they actually share DNA is very small, if they do, pair of individuals who are separated by 10 generations do share DNA, there's a good chance it's going to be very long DNA. And that is quite surprising. So even though your chance of sharing drops very, very fast, the average length of DNA that you do share drops much more slowly. And so another question is, how well can you recover different relationships? If you compare two individuals' DNA, and you've gone into so many details, you've not just worked out how much DNA you share, what overall fractions, but you've now gone and worked out what the lengths of these different regions of DNA you share are. How well can you then infer, how well can you then deduce how closely related this pair of individuals are? So if we look over on the right-hand side, what this is saying is, suppose a pair of individuals share a stretch of DNA which is 150 million base pairs long, so a very, very long. So this means they share, for example, over half of chromosome 1. They share this intact, this region. If we know a pair of individuals share a region which is that long, 150 megabase pairs long, The probability is, this red is what is the chance that they are brothers and sisters. And you can see this bar that goes almost to the top. There's a 90% chance that that pair of individuals will be brothers and sisters. And up here is a 10% chance they will be first cousins. So if a pair of individuals have very long DNA share in a region which is very long, then more likely or not they are brothers and sisters. And then as you move towards the left, we consider shorter regions. So here, let's suppose they shared a region which was 90 million base pairs long. What does that then tell us? Well, we see there's a 50% chance, so this red bar comes about halfway up, 50% chance that this pair of individuals are brothers and sisters. There's now, what's this, about a 30% chance of their first cousins, maybe a 10% chance of their second cousins, a chance of their third cousins, and so on. So as you move left, as the amount of DNA region, as the length reduces, it becomes harder and harder to tell how closely related. So here's an example. Suppose we found two individuals and they had a DNA test and we found they shared a length of DNA 40 million base pairs long. This doesn't actually tell us much information about how closely related. That pair of individuals might be full siblings, they might be brother and sister, of course they've probably known that beforehand, or maybe not. They might be first cousins, they might be second cousins, third cousins. All of these things are reasonably plausible. And these are long regions of sharing. 40 million is a long region to share. As you get smaller still, what this shows you is it's very hard to actually make inferences. So from the DNA, if you've measured relatedness, you've measured how long these regions are shared DNA between paired individuals. It's very hard to then know how related those individuals are based on that information. So seeing that I've got a couple of minutes, I've just got a few slides to explain how we use this in my area of research. So the focus is, as Morris introduced me, is trying to understand complex trait genetics. So what that means is we're paid to try and understand diseases, for example, like diabetes or cancer. And it turns out this stuff is very important in that application. And so, for example, we want to try and understand what parts of the DNA make an individual more likely to have Crohn's disease, or more likely to have schizophrenia, or more likely to develop a different type of cancer. We also want to be able to predict which individuals are more likely to get different diseases. And it turns out all this theory we've looked at is very important, because something we're very interested in is the heritability of a trait. So what the heritability means is how much of a trait's variation you can understand. So if we, for example, were to take human height, human height is a highly heritable characteristic. As in, if you have tall parents, it's very likely you will also be tall. And what it means is the heritability is 80%. That means that most of the variation in your height is actually due to genetics, and that's what this shows. So the total variation in the population, you have individuals who are maybe 160 centimetres high up to 185, so there's maybe a 25 centimetre difference between the height of different people. The majority of that variation is actually due to genetics, in red. Some of it is due to your environment, so some is due to your lifestyle, what you eat, and just completely random factors. But the majority is due to genetics. And that's shown on this plot. So here we have the height of a father and the height of their child. And what we see is parents who are higher tend to have taller children. And this seems like a bit of a segue from what I was discussing earlier, but it turns out the way we measure the similarity between pairs of individuals' DNA is very important in this application, because we want to estimate the heritability of traits. So I spend most of my time trying to estimate these heritabilities so we can understand different traits. And to do that, we have to compare pairs of individuals' DNA, and we have to examine exactly how much DNA they have. And so this is just the final slide. It shows why this is useful. What these boxes correspond to is different ways of measuring how genetically similar pairs of individuals are. So the purple one is if we just use the family tree information. So suppose we have a family tree of 5 generations, and we know that brothers and sisters are expected to be 50% similar, first cousins are expected to be 1/8 similar. If we try and then estimate for heritability how much of a trait is due to genetics using that, we can get a decent idea. And so here, what we're trying to estimate for truth is 50%. So we've done simulations, and we're getting a reasonably good estimate. But if instead we actually use these exact estimates of relatedness, so if we measure the exact relatedness, that's this blue box. And what we see, what hopefully you can tell, this is slightly smaller, slightly more narrow, and that means we can do this work a bit more accurately. And this is a very simple example. But when we start expanding our studies to more and more individuals, it becomes important. So if we want to look at a particular trait, if we base it on a family tree, we can estimate the heritability, how much is due to genetics, very poorly. It could be as high as 100% or as low as 0%. But if we actually use these methods I described earlier of measuring exact sharing between individuals, we could do a lot better. And so, just to summarise, my closing question: am I related to George Clooney? I guess the answer is yes, I am in some way. If we go back far enough, everyone is related to everyone else. But what's more important is, do I share DNA? How much DNA do we have in common? And sadly, from my point of view as an aspiring actor, we're unlikely to share much DNA. But then on the other hand, if we do share DNA, we're likely to share quite a reasonable amount. It will be quite long. So I just want to thank David Baldwin, who I did some work with, and just credit the Medical Research Council who allowed me to do this fun stuff. And as I say, if you want to have a look at this paper I've been talking about, there's a link here, or you can try and find it on Google. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Doug. Fascinating issues raised in your presentation from a genealogical point of view. So, for example, with my autosomal DNA results, if I match somebody with, on a say, a 20-cent organ piece of 20 cents, DNA segment that's 20 cent organs in length, can I look at your paper and see what the probability were first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins, fifth cousins?
Yeah, that's right. So given that length, I should have said, we talk about everything being in terms of millions of base pairs, but one centime organ is about 1 million base pairs. So given that length, you can then look back at the table and try and infer how closely related, but unfortunately it would be quite hard to infer that with much accuracy.
Right, okay, and presumably it's possible though that we could actually generate tables where you could actually have 20 centime organs, 19, 18, 17,
yeah.
16, and then you have a range of possibilities or probabilities for each type of relationship. Maybe it was first cousin, second cousin, third cousin once removed, fourth cousin once removed, fourth cousin twice removed,
yeah.
etc., etc.
So that's something you can do. And I should say, if that sounded a bit unique to my last answer, of course, we have the benefit that if you find multiple shared regions, then you can use that information. So, okay, maybe one region on its own won't give us much information, but then if you start to connect these together, then this will give you a better thing, because if someone shares 3 20 centime organ regions, and that would say more likely to be more closely related than if they shared 6-10 megabase pair region, 10 centime organ regions. And so we can look at the different distribution of these to try and get a bit better. But that would be very interesting to look up.
Has anyone actually done that, looking at not just the longest segment, but also the total amount of DNA in terms of centime organs, and trying to correlate it with a probability to a particular cousin relationship?
I'm not aware that anyone has. It would be interesting to do.
That will be the next step.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions for Doug? Yeah, we have a question here in the back.
So you were trying to take account of the sort of multiple shared ancestors. So if we go back 10 generations that were all related to each other, have you taken that into account what effect that has on the second type, the Recombination Rate?
We did. So those results I showed were mainly looking at a simple case where you just have a pair of individuals with 1 or 2 common ancestors. So that's a very simple case, as it were. But then we did big simulations where we chucked in 50,000 individuals, and they start out unrelated, but as you move down, everyone starts mixing with everyone else, and then you end up with these very, very complicated things, and it just becomes a mess. Yeah, once you have all these different relationships, so once you're not just related by 5 generations with one ancestor, it's 5 generations with one ancestor, 6 generations with another 2, and so on. And then you're throwing all these different factors into the mix, and the distribution becomes even more complicated. Yeah.
And you're still working on this type of investigation, but mainly applying it to heritability of traits and disease?
That's right. So, it's what I look at now is just a continuation. So it's understanding that it's really important to measure relatedness between pairs of individuals very exactly, and actually that tells us a huge amount of how, actually from a research into disease point of view, how much different people are going to develop different traits and how well you can predict these different things. So for example, if you had I look at epilepsy a lot, and if you have a brother who has epilepsy, this will increase your chance of having epilepsy yourself. And it turns out how closely, how much DNA you share exactly will be an important factor, but then trying to understand what your risk of developing epilepsy is.
Andy, we have a question here.
Simple question, but I know it's not going to be a simple answer. And it adds to what John said. Apart from a car, what do you order? Apart from a car, what is a walk or something?
Oh, right.
I know you're saying what's the definition of it?
So what we look mainly in terms of base pairs, so there's 3 billion base pairs of DNA, so 3 billion of these individual A, C, Gs or Ts. Yeah, another way of describing DNA is using these Morgans or centimorgans. And so what a centimorgan, I think it's officially defined as 1 centimorgan. If the 2 genetic sites are separated by 1 centimorgan, it means there's a 1% chance of one of these recombination events happening.
I like to think of it as centimeters. And if you have a chromosome that's long, that is that long, the centimorgan is somewhere like that. It's very crudely you can equate it with different lengths. So you can either express it's not quite the same, but a lot of people will say this DNA segment is 10 centimorgans long. So it roughly equates with length. But what's long on chromosome 1 is not necessarily the same long on chromosome 2. But it roughly equates. So it's just a measurable size, as depth. But it is difficult to explain because it's not quite that. Question for Debbie. I'm sorry.
Imagine you're going on a car journey and you want to get from A to B, and you've got 2 ways, so it's a measure of how long it takes you to get from A to B. You can measure it on the map, and you might think it's going to take you 2 hours, but in reality, maybe all sorts of things going on those ways, you might have to go on your scooter to get there. So it's a bit thing genetically.
Very nice.
And there's more where that came from. Anyway, thank you very, very much. Next speak.
That's good. That's good. Stop the recording here as well.
Quick question to you for reasons that will be obvious. I didn't want to ask this question publicly.